Under a sky full of gray clouds, the city remained in a deep silence, reflecting the mourning that unfolded in the cemetery. Among the time-worn tombstones, a group of residents dressed in black gathered to pay their last respects to Sarah, whose presence has always been a beacon of hope for the community. Rusty, an expressive-eyed mutt, wandered among the mourners, absorbing the sadness in the air with his silent loyalty. Reverend John, in his black robes, conducted the ceremony with words of consolation, though his countenance revealed a greater weight than his words could convey. The wind whispered among the stones, creating an even more melancholy atmosphere as the city bid farewell to one of their beloved souls. As Rusty circled between people's legs, her gaze fixed on Sarah's coffin, something unsettling hovered in the air. The residents exchanged worried looks, whispered among themselves, but no one dared to break the silence that accompanied the funeral ritual. Suddenly, Rusty, normally calm and reserved, erupted into an unusual agitation. His eyes filled with sadness fixed on the coffin, as if something inside him called him. The dog began to bark, first low and hesitant, then in a frenetic cadence that broke the serenity of the moment. "Reverend, something is wrong with Rusty," whispered an elderly lady, squeezing the religious's arm. "Do not worry, Mrs. Jenkins. The loss affects everyone in different ways," replied the Reverend with a forced smile, but his eyes betrayed the restlessness as the murmurs of the crowd grew. A stranger named David, attracted by the frantic barking, watched the scene intrigued. His keen eye captured the tension in the air, and he set out to find out what was causing such a stir in Rusty. The beginning of the mystery cast its shadow over the city, a shadow that threatened to reveal truths buried in the past of Sarah. The graveyard fell silent. The murmurs ceased as prying eyes turned to Rusty. The dog, now in front of Sarah's coffin, kept barking as if trying to communicate something beyond human comprehension. David, the intrigued stranger, approached, his eyes fixed on the agitated dog. "Why the hell is this dog barking like that?" David questioned in a whisper to no one in particular. "It's a sign, I tell you," replied Mrs. Jenkins, an old lady with eyes full of superstition. "Animals have a sixth sense for these things. We should pay attention." As the whispering voices intensified, Reverend John tried in vain to calm Rusty, his hands trying to contain the dog's agitation. But Rusty was determined, his eyes fixed on the coffin as if seeking something hidden in the shadows. "Reverend, what is going on here?" asked David, looking at the religious with a suspicious expression. "Do not worry, my son. Loss affects everyone in strange ways. This is just a faithful friend lamenting the departure of his mistress," replied the Reverend with a serenity that did not convince anyone. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the cemetery itself was waiting for something to unfold before the attentive eyes of the residents. Rusty, ignoring efforts to silence him, barked louder, as if defying fate. David, feeling that something was deeply wrong, decided it was time to investigate further. His steps led him towards the coffin, where Rusty, with eyes full of sadness, continued his lament. The mystery was just beginning to unfold, and each bark of Rusty was an echo laden with promises of obscure revelations. The cemetery echoed with Rusty's frantic barking, each sound a dissonant note amid the silence of farewell. Reverend John, now visibly uncomfortable, tried in vain to restrain the dog, but Rusty's agitation persisted, as if he were the only one aware of something dark unfolding. "Reverend, what's wrong with that dog? It seems he is trying to tell us something," David asked, his eyes fixed on the religious. The Reverend, looking around to make sure no one was listening, whispered with a barely concealed urgency. "This dog is disturbing something that should remain buried, something we all try to forget." As residents watched with prying eyes, Rusty redoubled his efforts to get closer to the coffin. Their barking echoed as a silent accusation, nudging the consciences of those present. "But what is he trying to tell us?" asked David, his expression mixing bewilderment and determination. Reverend John, now with his eyes fixed on the agitated dog, hesitated before answering. "There are secrets in this place that should not be revealed, things that should remain buried." Tension increased, creating a trail of suspense as residents wondered what the Reverend was trying to hide. Mrs. Jenkins, with her keen intuition, muttered to herself, "Rusty is the messenger of truths we would rather forget." Rusty, ignoring calls to calm down, continued to bark at the coffin, as if challenging not only the living, but something beyond. The mystery of Sarah's burial was about to unfold, and Rusty's incessant barking was the disturbing soundtrack to this grim outcome. The cemetery became the scene of an imminent revelation, and each bark was an echo that resonated with the weight of hidden truths. As the cemetery still echoed with Rusty's restless barking, David felt a growing urgency to unravel the hidden mysteries that hung over Sarah's burial. His determined steps led him to the small community, where whispered conversations and furtive glances suggested that something deeper was buried in Sarah's story. David approached the residents, each question revealing fragments of a narrative. Mrs. Jenkins, the oldest in town, shared veiled memories, her words loaded with mystery. Sarah had been carrying a heavy burden for years. There was more to her life than the smiles she showed the city, things people would rather forget, she said, her eyes filled with old memories. David continued his investigations, revelations emerging as shadows of truth, complicated relationships, dark connections, and a past that everyone was trying to bury along with Sarah. Conversations with other residents, each revealing pieces of the puzzle, painted a more complex picture of the deceased's life. One particular piece of information encouraged David to run away and go somewhere to look for more details of this mystery that was unfolding. In a dusty, dark room on the outskirts of town, David discovered ancient records, yellow letters, and faded photographs, each artifact telling a part of the story that Reverend John was trying to hide. David, driven by unrelenting curiosity, connected the dots between Sarah the Reverend and past events. The night progressed, but David's resolve was unshakable. He discovered that Sarah, despite her image as a sympathetic woman, was linked to secrets that stretched through the corridors of time. Rusty's barking seemed to echo in David's mind, prompting him to reveal truths that had remained obscure for too long. At dawn, David realized that the city was hiding deep emotional scars, and that Sarah was carrying a burden that transcended death. The investigation was just beginning, but each discovery was an essential piece to understand the enigma that involved the woman everyone thought they knew. The city's past was about to be unraveled, and David was determined to uncover the secrets that bound Sarah, Rusty, and the mysterious Reverend John. The city, shrouded in the gloom of the morning, saw David emerge from the night of investigations. Sarah's secrets, now unraveled, the inhabitants, still in mourning over the city, watched with curious and apprehensive glances as David confronted the Reverend John in front of the church. "Reverend, your secrets will no longer remain buried. I know what lies behind Rusty's barking, the murmuring of the city, and the shadow that hangs over this place," proclaimed David, his voice echoing through the ancient walls of the church. The Reverend, pale face and guilty eyes, tried to maintain a facade of serenity, but the mask began to crumble. "You don't understand, my son. Some truths are better left in the past. They shouldn't be dug up." Rusty, the faithful friend, stood beside David, staring at the Reverend, as if he knew the moment of truth had come. The city was silent, as if awaiting the end of a drama that was about to unfold. "Sarah, she's not in the coffin, is she?" accused David, his defiant expression. Reverend John bowed his head, unable to face David's discerning gaze. "I had no choice. She made mistakes the city couldn't forgive. That was the only way to keep the peace." The words of the Reverend echoed through the churchyard, each syllable a confession of buried sins. Rusty, hearing the truth, let out a wistful howl, as if lamenting the betrayal of his mistress. David, wielding the revelations like a sword, faced the Reverend with relentless determination. "You chose silence, Reverend, but the city deserves the truth. What else are you hiding?" The city was immersed in suspense, the breeze whispering the revealed secrets. The confrontation between David and the Reverend John was not just a battle between two men, but a clash between past and present, between hidden truths and inevitable revelations. As the villagers absorbed the Reverend's confession, the town was enveloped in an aura of unease. Rusty, the faithful friend, stood beside David, as if witnessing not only the revelation of a secret, but the beginning of an irreversible change in the apparent tranquility of the small community. The suspense reached its peak, and the next pages of the city chapter promised to be full of unexpected developments. The setting sun tinged the sky with orange tones, casting a golden light on the city, now permeated by the echo of revealed truths. David, still with the tension of confrontation on his shoulders, felt the responsibility to unravel the rest of the unfolding mystery. Rusty stood by David, a loyal spectator of the events that rocked the city. His eyes, though expressive, seemed to carry a melancholy, as if he shared the pain of the unearthed secrets. Word of Reverend John's revelation spread like wildfire. The residents, divided between unbelief and shock, gathered in groups, whispering and exchanging looks loaded with meaning. The church, once a place of consolation, was now the scene of a complex plot of betrayal and buried secrets. David, moved by the need to clarify all the pieces of the puzzle, went with Rusty to the entrance of the church. "There's still more to discover, my friend. This city hides more secrets than we can imagine." Rusty, with his piercing eyes, seemed to agree. Together, they decided to investigate why Sarah was forced to leave and where she was now. Each clue unearthed was an attempt to understand what had led to that situation, and the fate of the city hung over their heads like a sword. As night fell, the city was in a state of transition. The candle lights were beginning to light up in the houses, but now they were burning under the shadow of an unearthed truth. David and Rusty, united by the purpose of revealing the full story, plunged deeper into the dark plot that unfolded. The residents, still perplexed, watched as they set off into the unknown. Each step was a breakthrough in the complicated narrative, each discovery bringing the city closer to the close of a tumultuous chapter. Rusty, now leading David down the dark paths of the city, seemed to have embraced the mission of his late owner. His barking, before lament, now took on a tone of determination, as if leading David towards the climax of the story that was yet to unfold. The city, under the darkness of night, remained in suspense, awaiting the next chapters of the drama that had begun with a faithful friend and the hidden secrets in the shadow of the church. The city was now plunged into the dead of night, a silence laden with reflection and uncertainty. David, guided by Rusty's determined barking, continued his search for the secrets hidden in the folds of Sarah's past. The dim light of the candles in the houses cast dancing shadows on the deserted streets. Residents, still perplexed by recent revelations, watched through the windows, every sound and murmur adding to the atmosphere of mystery surrounding the city. David, with Rusty by his side, found a winding path that led them to the place where Sarah was buried. A lonely tombstone marked the place, but the coffin that was to contain his body remained empty. Rusty, looking at the grave with sadness, seemed to understand the depth of the untold story. "Where is Sarah, Rusty? What really happened?" whispered David, as if the night itself could reveal the secrets kept in the shadows. The dog, in turn, barked softly, as if he wanted to tell a story that only he knew. David, with a lantern lighting the floor, discovered a hidden compartment under the tomb. There was revealed an old diary, belonging to Sarah, containing pages full of her silenced confessions and pains. Sitting beside the grave, David flipped through the yellowed pages, unraveling the challenges and sacrifices Sarah faced to protect her true identity. Sarah had grown up in a dysfunctional family, marked by abuse and neglect. Her traumatic childhood led her to make desperate decisions to survive, including running away from home at age 16 and engaging in illicit activities to support herself. Over the years, Sarah had created a new identity to escape her past. She changed her name, moved to a new city, and cut all ties with her past to start over. Few people knew who she really was and what she had left behind. Sarah had a secret relationship with an influential man in town, who was married. This relationship was not only a potential scandal, but also had legal and social implications that could destroy the reputation of both. Before settling in the city and trying to lead a quieter life, Sarah was involved in a circle of criminal activities. She had information about unsolved crimes and dangerous people, which posed a constant threat to her safety. Sarah had given birth to a child in adolescence, but unable to care for him, gave him up for adoption. She always felt deep guilt and sorrow for this decision, and kept secret letters and memories of the son she never knew. Sarah had been killed violently, and so that there was no riot in the city, the Reverend decided to hide Sarah's body. Sarah's body was never placed in the coffin that everyone believed was buried in the cemetery. Instead, the Reverend John, who was aware of Sarah's secrets and her dangerous connections, decided to hide her body to protect the peace and stability of the city. He feared that the full disclosure of Sarah's secrets would cause turmoil and mistrust among the villagers. The Reverend, along with some accomplices, removed Sarah's body shortly before the funeral and hid it in a remote and unknown location. They replaced the body in the coffin with stones and objects to simulate the weight and ensure that no one noticed Sarah's absence during the funeral ceremony. Sarah's body was hidden in an isolated cave outside the city, a place only the Reverend and his accomplices knew. They hoped that by keeping the body hidden, Sarah's secrets would remain buried forever, thus protecting the reputation of the city and the people involved. However, Rusty's constant barking and David's persistence in investigating the suspicious events surrounding Sarah's funeral eventually unearthed these hidden truths. The discovery of Sarah's diary was the turning point, revealing the true extent of her complicated life and the secrets she kept, and forcing the Reverend to confront her actions and the truth before the community. The city, which had judged Sarah for imaginary errors, now witnessed her full story. Rusty, alongside David, mourned the loss of his mistress, but also celebrated the liberation from the truth she longed to share. The residents, in the distance, perceived a change in the atmosphere, as if the silence of the night turned into a collective sigh of understanding. David, with the diary in hand, shared the revelations with the city, unraveling the details of the past that Sarah had kept hidden. The city, now illuminated by the light of truth, faced a new dawn, guided by understanding and forgiveness. Rusty, the faithful friend who had been witness and guardian, could now rest in peace beside the empty tomb. David, in closing the diary, felt the weight of responsibility for having unearthed such a complex story, but also recognized the power of truth to heal old wounds. The city chapter, full of drama, suspense, and twists, reached its end. The silence after the revelation hovered over the streets, but now carried the promise of a new beginning. The city, marked by the events of the past, now had the opportunity to build a future based on understanding, acceptance, and overcoming. What do you think of this story? Do you think they acted right? Leave your comment below to know your opinion. It is very important to us. If you like this exciting story, help us by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Thank you very much for watching us, and see you in the next story.